Can scandals still sink a politician? I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. Bill, the New York Times asked this question, and of course they preface that headline with, "In the era of Trump, can scandals still sink a politician?" But they go on to point out a couple of things. For example, Representatives Duncan Hunter and Chris Collins both got reelected while essentially facing felony charges. I believe they were both out on bail for felony charges. Bob Menendez in New Jersey had a hung jury in his trial for bribery and fraud. And then they go back and dig into some older things like Joe Biden's plagiarism charges from, that he plagiarized things back in 1988. Cory Booker apparently had a fictitious character that he used to use in speeches called T-Bone. And then after somebody called him out on it, he just stopped talking about T-Bone. So apparently T-Bone may not have existed. In any case, there are several other things listed, but the question I thought was an interesting one because I think we are in a different era, are we not, Bill? Where, for example, back in the old days, if you had an affair or even an indication you'd been unfaithful to your wife, that was the end of your political career, at least if it got out in the press. Have things changed?
That's a really interesting way to look at it, Scott, because I have to tell you, while you were asking the question, I thought, what kind of scandal would it take to bring down Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, for that matter? And I can't think of anything.
Yeah.
I can't. In fact, that is a problem. Just the fact that the moral fiber of the country is frayed so much that not only are we past the time when having just a extramarital affair. When I say just an extramarital affair, that says a great deal about your character. But nevertheless, in today's milieu, it's just warm up. It's batting practice. I can't think of anything that would sink those two politicians. And here's the part of it that's disturbing. That in itself would be disturbing. It is disturbing. But the part that's disturbing is, since I cannot think of a scandal that would bring them down, I'm also rapidly reaching the point where I don't know if there's any world where legal authority still brings them down. I mean, I know I keep coming back to this. It's just the most foremost example. Hillary Clinton had so obviously committed so many felonies while in office, and she just completely walks away from it.
Well, and you don't even have to take that, Bill, because, even though I know you've said this many times, and there are many people on the right who believe that Hillary Clinton should have been charged with crimes, but Hillary Clinton was not charged with crimes. Duncan Hunter was charged with crimes. So was Chris Collins. And they actually are out on bail awaiting felony charges, and they got reelected. So, let's just for a minute, let's set aside Hillary, because the other argument could be, well, Hillary hasn't been charged.
No, fair enough. And Marion Barry was caught smoking crack on camera.
Yeah.
Did a little jail time and then was promptly reelected again. So where do you go with this? You have to look at, again, you have to kind of come back to principles, and sometimes to avoid larger evils, you have to eat smaller ones. That's the whole idea of the presumption of innocence, right? I mean, the presumption of innocence is exceedingly precious because when you get right down to it, in a nation of individuals, the biggest nightmare is you versus the law, and you're right. So when I say we have to eat lesser evils so that the larger evils are reduced, the presumption of innocence means that a number of people will get away with crimes because the burden is not on them to prove that they were innocent. The burden is on somebody else to prove that they did it. And any number of people who've committed from the most trivial to the most serious of crimes go free, which is evil, and a series of evils, and we eat that evil in order that we don't have to deal with the much larger evil of living in a society where innocent people feel like they can be put away just by having somebody point at them, which has been the case.
What do you mean by the phrase "we eat that evil"? What does that mean?
What I mean by that is that the presumption of innocence means that we have to watch O.J. Simpson walk out of a courtroom with a big smile on his face, and we have to tell ourselves that I know he did it, you know he did it, he knows he did it, everybody knows he did it. Just as an example of O.J., everybody knows it, but they didn't prove it, and watching him go free. and as well as any number of other cases like this, he's just the most highest profile example of that I can think of at the moment. Watching him walk out of the courtroom free is an injustice, and we had to swallow that. We had to eat it. We had to eat it because because grown-up people are able to say this is not justice. It's clear to me that this murderer is going free, but since we're fallible people and since humans are not perfect, we're going to have to accept this. We're going to have to eat the evil of this guilty man going free. We're just going to have to take it in exchange for the protections that the presumption of innocence give to each one of us. Now, when I say when we come back to our principles again, this is where it leads me. You say there are two people who were elected and they were under felony investigation, right?
Actually, they were charged with felonies, out on bail, awaiting trial.
Okay. Well, again, we're stuck with a system of laws to help us through the gray areas, right? And this is why we have laws. So my reaction to this would be, since they have not yet been convicted of crimes, the presumption of innocence has to be with them. And if they want to run for office, then they should be allowed to do that.
And that all sounds good. And I guess, wasn't there a day in this country, though, when if you had been investigated by the FBI, that would have been enough, let alone actually being charged?
Well, you would think if your political career began in the living room of a domestic terrorist, that would disqualify you from post office clerk.
I have no idea of whom you speaketh.
I'm speaking of the former president. And that's not up for discussion, by the way. It's not like this is a conspiracy theory that Barack Obama's career began in Bill Ayers' living room. That actually happened, and everybody knows it. No one denies it. And Bill Ayers was a terrorist who bombed people, killed people, a domestic left-wing Marxist terrorist. These are not conspiracy theories, and these are not things that I've made up. These are things that everybody admits. They don't want to advertise it, but everybody knows it's true, because it is true. So yes, we have fallen an enormously long way, and now we find ourselves in a world where we basically, I think, are kind of scraping together whatever shreds of morality and decency and legality as we can, and as we watch these top-level politicians just essentially walk above all of this stuff, we just kind of gather what we can around us to keep ourselves warm and try to live our own lives according to a moral code that the entire country used to abide by.
Well, I wonder where a republic goes from this. I mean, you know the John Adams quote where he said that this Constitution was framed for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the governance of any other.
That's right.
It sounds to me like character has just gone out the window, and really all we care about is, can our guy win? I don't really care what kind of a person he is. Can he win?
There's a fair amount of truth to that, and rather than putting all the onus of this on the opposition, let's put the onus of it on ourselves. There are a lot of qualities that Donald Trump has that I think are not presidential, and in other circumstances, I would consider him to be not a serious candidate. And I suspect that under most other circumstances, most people would have agreed with me. I don't need to go into them now. His supporters, and I'm one of them, understand that we are now in an era where the standards have fallen so low, and that the fighting is so dirty that the only quality left remaining is somebody who is going to fight in the first place. Whether they fight dirty, whether they look ugly doing it, whether they throw mud back, whether they stoop to their level, whether they say things that are embarrassing us, these things are things that no longer concern me and concern most conservatives, simply because the situation is so dire, and the people who do have presidential character and experience are so incapable of fighting this cultural war. They're so absolutely blindsided by it and crippled by it and hamstrung by it. And so you're stuck with a world where a guy who I think in many ways is not presidential in the way I would like the president of the United States to ideally be, becomes paradoxically the last chance for any kind of a restoration of the entire idea of a president and the entire idea of a republic. And that's where we are. We don't have to like it. I certainly don't. But those are the cards. So the big question that you're asking, of course, is where do we go from here? If we're willing to elect politicians who have had the kind of records that politicians on both sides have had for quite a while now. I don't think it's even, but that's my personal opinion. Nevertheless, there's no question that what you say is true, that even the suggestion of moral turpitude, just the suggestion of it, would be enough to keep somebody out of office for most of the history of this country. I think Mr. Adams is correct. I think that this Constitution only works for, and we're seeing it in front of our eyes. This is our curse. We didn't have to go storm the beaches of Iwo Jima. We have to. Our burden is to watch these things be destroyed and do everything we can to stop it. But what he said is absolutely true. You cannot leave self-governance to people who are not even capable of governing themselves. That's really what it comes down to, right? I mean, if the whole idea of this country is that common people could govern themselves, because throughout the history of this country, until very recently anyway, the common people of this country were blessed with a high level of education compared to the common people around the world, a deep love of country, a deep religious belief which gave them moral fiber and the ability to know the difference between the right thing and the smart thing, or the right thing, the smart thing, and the legal thing, and pick the right thing. And as all of these internal qualities dissolve, the structure that holds up the entire society becomes gutted, and it doesn't just deflate, because if it deflated, it would be kind of easier to fight. I think what happens is, I think it gets hollowed out, Scotty, and then instead of just deflating under the weight of moral decline, I think it just eats itself from the inside out, and you're left with this structure that looks like what we're used to and feels like what we're used to, but is now essentially hollow. And rather than deflating, it's just simply going to crumble and collapse.
So short of a spiritual movement on the order of what you might call the Third Great Awakening in this country, try to imagine for me the kind of character that could come along on the national stage and bring us back to foundational principles. Is that even possible? And what would be, like, what do we look for? What's the mark of a person like that who could arise and in a way be able to sort of wipe the slate clean and start fresh?
That's a great question, and the answer came to me very clearly. I would think that the first quality that we would look for in such an individual is the ability to make fun of themselves, for self-deprecation. Sincerity is everything. Once you can fake that, you got it made. And this is what I've been doing for a decade now, is faking this humility, while I go to sleep on large piles of cash surrounded by beautiful women. But the honest truth is that the person who could bring the country together would have to be somebody who loved this country, understood it, understood how to tell the story of it, and also understood how people have gone astray, and has the spiritual strength to not take the easy way out and whip them for it, which is where my moral failings come in. The person, I think, who could reunite the country would be a person who would be willing to say, look, we're all part of this goat rodeo. Nobody here has got clean hands, and why don't we just put all of these labels aside, and I mean permanently. We're just not going to use them anymore. We're not going to say Republican, Democrat, liberal, progressive, conservative. These ideas are all gone now. You have your opinions. I have my opinions. We're all Americans, so let's work on this as Americans, and let's get this entire party thing and this entire label thing out the door. And if you could get to that place, and by the way, I think people would rush to this. I think they'd knock doors down to get to this. But as I said in an interview with Dave Rubin, who's gay, married, gay, former liberal, and a person whose lifestyle differs a great deal from my own, Dave Rubin is a man of integrity and character. And when he was interviewing me, I said to him, Dave, you could take you and 10 of your closest followers, me and 10 of my closest followers, lock us in a room in Pennsylvania someplace, turn off the air conditioning, and we would be able to come up with a political platform that would appeal to 85 to 90% of the country. We'd get 85% of the vote. I have no doubt about it whatsoever. None. And he completely agreed. What does that look like? It has to be, when you say what kind of person does it take, Scott, it takes a person who can explain things in a way that makes it palatable to people, that it doesn't make it look like a surrender on their part. It's not so that it's not like I have to surrender all the things I believe in order to get the country back on track. You just have to explain why what you want and what you want, you two guys, you actually want the same thing. You just want to go about it different ways, but you want the same thing. And this ability to get people out of their trenches is the magic ticket. And the ability to laugh about yourself, the ability to joke about yourself, is the disarming thing. It is the thing that immediately drops people's guard. Is if somebody who you may not respect, or somebody who you may dislike, or whose politics you may dislike, if they're willing to lead with a joke about themselves, and that joke is rooted in enough truth to be truthful and funny, that is saying that this person is not so hidebound and not so rigid and not so ideological that they're beyond reason. And if they're going to take the first shot at themselves, then the other team's already got 1 point on the board, which we gave them, and now they can relax a little bit. And this quality is exceedingly rare. Ronald Reagan had a pretty good share of it, I think, and certainly George Washington, of all the presidents that we've had, I think without much question, was the man of the highest moral character. But the time where people respect the kind of things that made Washington great has left us now. And whether that's good or bad, and I suspect it's bad, it's gone, and I don't think it's coming back. So what's needed, I think, is a person that can find morality in a world where morality itself has been made suspect by people whose entire existence is predicated on gaining personal political power.
If you haven't seen that Dave Rubin, Bill Whittle interview, you can Google that and look that up. It's well worth the watch. There's also a lot of other content well worth the watching at BillWhittle.com, and it's made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com who pay $9.95 a month to produce and disseminate this content. We're grateful to those people for making this show possible. If you'd like to join that team of the producers and not just consumers, we invite you to do so by going to BillWhittle.com and clicking that subscribe link. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.
And you're not consumers, you're citizens.